This is a final session of our seminar. I would like to invite one more Red Hat person, evangelist of Red Hat, Ian Wildeboer.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm using big letters today because we have big stories to tell. Thank you all for being here. And it's the second time I'm in Moscow. I made it through border control without any problems, which is kind of untypical, seeing the amount of stamps in my passport. The last time I went to some other country, I had to wait for 3 hours until they let me through. I guess they found out that I run one of the WikiLeaks mirrors or something. But my job today is, as always, as I'm doing since the last 5 years, to talk to you about what open source is, what open standards are, and what kind of freedom. You've heard a lot today about technologies that Red Hat produces, about hybrid cloud environments, about open standards for that, about implementations at big companies and at small companies and the like. The interesting thing is, why does that work? Why does Red Hat, which is technically speaking still quite a small company with almost 6,000 people now, but compare that to companies like Microsoft or IBM or Oracle. But how do we manage all of this? Why does it work? Well, the reason it works is quite simple. It's because of you people. It's because we are an open source company and we listen a lot and we work with the communities out there. And that's why I'm going to talk about the history of open source, open standards, content, and Red Hat. Now, this is me without the beard. For security reasons, I was advised to wear one. I always look like this. You know, wearing the hat is part of my official contract with Red Hat. When I do not wear the hat, I get less money. And my job title is evangelist. Now, what does evangelist mean? It's quite funny. Evangelist, the last time I got a problem with that was in Saudi Arabia, in Riyadh, when I went on stage in front of 200 sheikhs. And these 200 sheikhs were looking at me, and I showed this slide. And one of these sheikhs raised his hand and said, "Mr. Wildeboer, evangelist in Saudi Arabia. Do you think that's a good idea?" Yes, it is. Well, it was. Now I have two different business cards, one for Saudi Arabia and one for the rest of the world. Evangelist at Red Hat means that I'm here to talk to you. It also means that I spend a lot of time with politicians doing political lobby work for more open source, more open standards, less proprietary stuff, less Microsoft, less Oracle, and opening up the governments to do this thing. But not only governments, also in big companies on high level, explain to them why the community system, the open source system works so well for us and how companies can use it themselves. This is an interesting thing that happens nowadays. If you ever want to reach me, you can get me almost everywhere, by the way. My email address, quite simple, Twitter, Identica, my personal blog, jan.wildeboer.net, where I can put on opinions which are not necessarily the opinions of Red Hat as a company, and also on Doppler, LinkedIn, Xing, etc. And you will not find me on Facebook. Sorry for that. I think Mark Zuckerberg is one of the biggest criminals on this planet for the way he treats your data, the data of your children and everyone. Yeah, but you can find me on Google+. And the reason for that is actually quite simple. Google has a working business model. They know how to make money. For them, Google+ is an additional project. Facebook is struggling to find a real business model. Now, we have similar problems in the open source world. Red Hat is a fortunate company because we find a way over the years to not only make money, but also produce more free software for everyone to use in an honest and decent way. And I think respect is one of the most important things, and Facebook, for me personally, doesn't respect me. It tries to abuse me in ways that I cannot accept. So I left Facebook 2.5 years ago, and I had 2,500 friends on Facebook, and they never missed me, somehow. So I guess it's not that important. Now, before we talk about what's happening today, we need to go a little bit back into history. I will make this very short. I just want to show you some faces of very good-looking men, unfortunately only men. So this is the first one. He's a model, he's a free software inventor, effectively. This is Richard Stallman, Richard Matthew Stallman. And he created the concept of free software, the GNU GPL license, which Red Hat uses in quite a lot of projects. And why did he do that? Well, it's effectively quite simple. If you look at philosophy, I guess all of you here have studied philosophy the way I did, by reading one book and then be done with it. But in philosophy, there is a very important rule, and it's called the golden rule. And the golden rule is very simple. Don't do to other people what you don't want to see happen to yourself. Very fundamental rule in philosophy. And this is what he said should also work for software. And why did he come to this? Well, it's a long story, but the very short version is he was working at the MIT at that time, and they got a bunch of network-connected printers, the first ever printers with a network connection. At that time, we were using printers with Centronics plugs. Anyone remember Centronics plug? This giant plug, 36 pins, lots of signals in there. And one of the signals that the Centronics plug indicates is, well, one of the more obscure one is printer on fire, which really exists, and it indicates that your printer is causing smoke. And the other one is paper jam. Now, paper jam is a very simple signal, tells you fix the printer if you want to see your pages. These network-connected printers had to do all of this over the network, not via hardware, but over the network. And the firmware of these prototype printers did not include all of these signals, and the paper jam signal was missing. Now, in comes Richard Stallman in his typical hacker way and says, okay, this is a problem I can fix. The only thing I need is the source code for the firmware of this printer. So he calls the printer company and says, oh, we got your prototypes, and there's this thing missing. I know you have a lot of work to do, so if you give me the source code, I will add this feature which we need here, so my problem is solved. You will get the patches, and you can decide if you want to do it my way or any other way. I just don't want to cause you trouble. Give me the source code, and I can fix this. And the printer company guy says, oh, Richard, we know each other for a long time, and we're good friends, and etc. But I have signed an NDA, a non-disclosure agreement. I am not allowed to give you the source code. Now, this was new for Richard. Look at the time, we're talking 1985. At this time, companies that were buying computers did not buy software. They bought complete systems. They went to IBM and to other companies and said, set up an ERP system or whatever. And then the IBM people come in, the consultants, and they set up this thing. You're not even allowed to touch it effectively. You pay a lot of money, and it somehow works. But software was not a separate thing. It was not a product. It was not something you can buy. And Richard saw immediately, if I do not get the source code of the firmware, then we are creating a divide between the people who are allowed to work with software and the people who are not. And this is wrong. So how can we guarantee the freedom to always have the source code? And that's how he created free software, to guarantee this freedom of accessing the source code of software. And with that, as Richard is, he is a very intelligent young man, and as I said, very good looking. And as Richard is, he not only thought about the printer, but then in general, what does it mean 30, 40, 50 years in the future? I must guarantee this freedom forever. So he created not only the GPL license, but also the Free Software Foundation to defend the principles. And with that, free software entered the world and started in academics and then moved along quite fast into other areas. And nowadays, we have open source and free software everywhere. So that's step one. Free the software. Now there's even a song. I'm not going to sing it, but whenever you go to a presentation by Richard Stallman, he will typically ask you to sing the free software song. You can look it up on YouTube. There is even in proprietary MP3 format a record you can download. Don't listen to it. Don't do this. Second man, this is Sir Tim Berners-Lee. Tim Berners-Lee created what many people nowadays call the internet. Now the internet, technically speaking, is wrong. What he created is the web, HTTP and HTML, and he created that for a reason. At that time, we were using some very weird systems. Maybe some of you can even remember them. Who here has ever produced pages on Gopher, on a Gopher server? Who has ever managed a Gopher server? Yeah, that's really, it hurts. Trust me. So we were using weird systems at that time, stuff like NNTP, the Network News Transfer Protocol, and all of that stuff, and Gopher. And he created HTTP as a decentralized protocol, because at that time, you have to remember, we're talking now about the 90s. At that time, we had this giant fight in the market. Internet connections, as we know them nowadays, didn't exist. At home, I think I still have something like 2,000 CDs from AOL. We got these CDs from AOL with special software to connect to AOL, and you also got the same from CompuServe. Now, CompuServe typically gave you a floppy disk because that software was somehow smarter and needed not more place. But it was the fight of CompuServe versus AOL, and that was networking for most of the people. And if you had an account at CompuServe, you could talk to all your friends in CompuServe, but you could not send a message to someone in AOL because there were separated proprietary systems. Tim Berners-Lee said, this is wrong. We need to decentralize that. We need to make everyone be able to also have a server. And that's what the HTTP protocol implements. Everybody can run his own web server, and everybody can produce his own documents and deliver it to the world or to a select group of people, whatever way you want. And what he then did is said, looking at AOL and CompuServe, that we must make this open. Now, open is quite a lofty word. You can use it for a lot of things. But he defined a system for open standards, which is extremely important. He says communication must be standardized. We have to use standards to communicate, not whatever individual solution. And if we have a standard, everybody must be free to take a look at this standard and participate in the standard setting process. It must be open on that level. Then everybody must be free to take a look at the standard document, the document that describes the standard, no matter if it's online or printed or whatever. Then everybody must be free to implement the standard in software, no matter if it's proprietary or open source, without having to pay anything. No implementation cost, no patent licensing cost, nothing. It must be free. And then number 4, everybody must be free to use these implementations without having to pay for it. Now this sounds so simple and obvious, but in reality it doesn't work. Take your mobile phone. Your mobile phone connects to the GSM network. The GSM network is not for everyone. You cannot sit at home with your soldering iron and create a GSM phone. Even if you can, it is not allowed to book in because you have to be part of the patent pool and all of these telco companies to be able to do that. And this is so fundamentally wrong on many levels. It's one of the reasons, for example, that we at Red Hat and in Fedora, our community project, cannot ship a DVD player. The software exists. The software is open source. You can play DVDs on every Linux machine. That's not a problem. But to decode the content of a CD, which is encoded in a specific format, MPEG-2 in this case, you need to have a patent license from the MPEG Licensing Association. If you do not have that license, you cannot distribute the software. Now, if you go to the MPEG-LA and say, we are Red Hat, we're a big company, and we want to have everyone to be able to play DVDs. Can we please have a license for the DVD player? Then the MPEG-LA will tell you, yeah, it's simple. You pay 25 cents or something like that. I don't know exactly how much it is. 25 cents per installed player. You give us a monthly list of the number of players you have distributed, and then you pay for that. And we say, this is not possible because this is open source. When I produce a DVD player, I give it to you, for example, then you can make a copy and give it to him or her, and etc. I do not know how many players exist. And the MPEG-LA then says, if you do not know that, you don't get a license, period. And that's the reason why standardization, if it's not done in the open, can go absolutely wrong. And this is what we see everywhere. And that's why open standards are, in my opinion, almost more important than open source. Once I have an open standard, I will also have open source implementations. And open source will always win over time. There's no way out. The open source implementation will win. But first, we need to have a standard to work with. If we don't have a standard, it won't work. And this is what you see in our world nowadays with Microsoft-driven and etc. You see governments telling you to use Microsoft for this or that, not because they want to support Microsoft for that, simply because they went into this system of non-open standards and now they're stuck in it. And getting you out of that, that's the task of open standards and open source. And that's what we work for. It was still not enough. This is Lawrence Lessig. Lawrence Lessig is a law professor from the United States, and he said something very interesting. Copyright is becoming a real pain for many people. Recently, I was in Brussels at the European Commission, and I had a few members of the European Commission there, and etc., and we discussed. And I said, I have an investment tip for you people. And they were like, oh, investment tip from the evangelist, that's cool. I said, yes, you have to invest in companies that make concrete. The real concrete, what this stuff is made of, and etc. And they looked at me and said, why? I said, it's quite simple. Everybody under the age of 50, typically, has illegally copied music or a movie in his life, for sure. Sometimes you don't even notice. You go to a friend and, oh, you got these cool MP3 files, do you want to have them? Illegal, it's not allowed. So we have a whole generation of people that are all criminals. Now, if we take the law serious, and this is what's happening in many European countries, people are forced to pay lots of money for so-called illegal copies. And if we have all of these criminals there, we need to take the law serious. We have to put them all in jail. There's no way out, or we stop law. But if we all put them in jail, we need a lot of prisons. And to build these prisons, you need a lot of concrete. So invest in concrete companies if you take the law serious. And then they looked at me and started laughing, of course. But I said, no, there's a serious thing behind this here. We must make sure that these systems like copyright and etc. are used in a way that promotes innovation and sharing and communication and not stops it. And this is exactly what is happening. And Lawrence Lessig observed that the creative works from the 16th century, paintings and books and etc., are freely available. Why? Because they were created in a time where copyright didn't exist. So he said, what Richard Stallman did for software, we have to do for content, for texts, for music, for paintings, for photographies. And that's why he created a system called the Creative Commons. And with that, we have the most important things in place to create a world that is more open and that is better for everyone. And this is what is the fundament of what open source companies like Red Hat do and care about, making sure that the pool of technologies available to everyone becomes bigger. And the software we produce is always open source and free software and available to anyone. You heard a lot about cloud systems today, about cloud solutions that Red Hat produces. You can go to a website called ovirt.org, O-V-I-R-T.org. That's where the upstream projects work. You can go for OpenStack is one of these things too. There's a website, you can download this stuff, you can participate in the community. Our business model is not selling software. Our business model is selling support and service around it, stabilize it and make it accessible. And that's what you pay for, but never for the software. This is a very important difference. And with that, we're still not done. There's also this young man. This is Linus Torvalds. Linus Torvalds, at the moment, he created a process scheduler. It was a simple piece of software that later became the Linux kernel as we know it. And this is quite interesting, not only because he's drinking a very expensive bottle of beer, but what is quite interesting is what he said when he announced it. When he told the world that he wrote a kernel. He said, everybody out there using Minix. Minix is a very special operating system from a professor from the University of Amsterdam, Andrew Tannenbaum. And at that time, it had a very interesting license. You could use it, you could make derivatives of it, and etc. But you had to buy the book first. The book was Designing Operating Systems and was extremely expensive. At that time, I was a young student, and I was not that wealthy. Well, that has stayed the same, by the way. But I was not that healthy. I was standing there and was deciding, should I buy the book from Donald E. Knuth, The Art of Computer Programming, or should I buy Designing Operating Systems? And exactly in that week where I started to think about this message shows up. I'm doing a free operating system, just a hobby, won't be big and professional like GNU from Richard Stallman, for 386 clones. This is the understatement of the century. He said he's going to do a thing as a hobby. And nowadays, our lives are dependent and controlled and managed and etc. by his kernel. This is the very strange thing. I get a lot of time I get asked the question, when will Linux take over the desktop from Microsoft? And while many people are focusing on the desktop and etc., Linux is already everywhere. When you wake up in the morning and you switch on your iPad, your Android tablet or whatever, you connect to your wireless network, which connects to the DSL network, and this DSL router, it runs Linux inside. You don't see it, but it runs Linux. You switch on your television, your flat screen television, wonderful expensive piece of technology. You switch it on, it runs Linux inside. Blu-ray players, Linux inside. Now comes the more interesting thing. When you make when you do online banking with your bank or you buy or sell stocks, the systems behind that also run Linux. The whole network infrastructure from Cisco, Juniper, and other companies, it's all based on Linux. Linux is everywhere, just not on the desktop. That's the interesting thing. And if you think about that for a second, this is really cool. When I started with Linux, at that time, it was 1991. So that's, oh geez, almost 22 years ago. Wow. So when I started with Linux 20 years ago, people were talking, saying, oh, you're anti-capitalist people. You defy property. You are socialist and evil people, and etc. And nowadays, when you look outside, the New York Stock Exchange, the stock exchange in Germany, effectively almost all stock exchanges on this planet run on Linux. Capitalism wouldn't work without free software. Think about that for a second, how times have changed. And these systems are relying on free software because they see it works. It delivers better performance, it delivers better results, and they can look at it when something goes wrong, and they do this. You know, people at the New York Stock Exchange are total experts, and they have some of the best kernel hackers working for them. And they share their knowledge with the upstream community because the license forces them to, but they also want to do this. And that's how the quality of the software grows by itself. And when he says it is just a hobby and won't be big and professional, then I can only say, well, look outside. You know, things have changed dramatically. And open source and the thinking in the open source way is at the heart of this. And that's what we do. This is Linus Torvalds nowadays, by the way. He has grown up, you know, he's a little bit, he has this perfect sign of older geekdom, you know, this here, the beer belly. It's part of growing up as a geek. It's quite funny, we have a symposium which used to be in Canada, in Ottawa, the OLS, the Ottawa Linux Symposium, and Red Hat has sponsored that for long years. And we actually did a check a few years ago on the t-shirt size we hand out. You know, and 12 years ago, the typical T-shirt we gave out was M or L or S, and nowadays the typical T-shirt size is XXL. So, you know, we have become more stable. It's a good thing. And Linus works for the Linux Foundation. He doesn't work for Red Hat, he doesn't work for Oracle or IBM, but he makes sure that this whole system, this meritocracy, keeps on working and gives you better stuff. And this is a glimpse into the future of software. You know, what we have experienced at Red Hat, which what I would call the new now. Open source has proven itself. You know, companies and organizations are using open source because it just delivers. They don't ask about the license anymore. And what is now happening is that I have talks with many customers about how can we use open source methods inside our own organization? How can we create our internal solutions in the open source way? Not necessarily making the result open source and available to everyone, but just these methods, you know, these cooperative community and all of that stuff. And that's what we talk a lot about with customers nowadays. A lot of consulting is done around that. And that's a sure sign of the times that something is fundamentally changing. We are getting to a better place with open source methods everywhere. And you will see this coming in companies, governments, and everywhere. So one of the things that you see, for example, in the cloud world is cloud people are always, or people interested in cloud, always worry about privacy and data security and etc. And that's why you see a huge movement, which I would call, you know, a little bit jokingly, patriotic cloud systems. So every country wants to create his own cloud, you know, the German cloud, which actually exists. Deutsche Wolke, as it is called in German. It's deutschewolke.de, you can look it up. We even have the English translation of that. So it's a few friends of mine, you know, we do this just for fun. And the English translation is the Kraut Cloud, so, you know, really like sauerkraut and stuff like that. But this movement of saying, you know, we create our own secure solution in our own country typically is based on open source solutions, because not everybody can reinvent the wheel. You cannot write cloud solutions from scratch. Now you can imagine that's one of the reasons that we today are talking to you and say, here is the open hybrid cloud. Here are the building blocks to build your own secure local cloud solution or a global worldwide solution. You decide. We give you the freedom to do this, and it's all based on open technologies, and you can tap into big communities to get the solutions you need. Without that, it simply wouldn't work. And by making sure that we work with all of these upstream projects, a few of them we create ourselves, but most of the upstream projects that you find in Red Hat Enterprise Linux or in JBoss are effectively not even managed by Red Hat people. You know, we give everything back to the community, and the community gives to us. This is a fair deal. It's an honest deal. We respect these upstream communities in the best possible way we can. And that results in community solutions and then commercial offerings. And it's always the same. If you want to have a feature in Red Hat Enterprise Linux, you have to start here, from the community into the product. There's no shortcut. Everything we deliver must be 100% open source. It's part of Red Hat's philosophy. You will never get proprietary software from Red Hat, period. Sometimes there are exceptions when we acquire a company and they had a proprietary product. It takes some time for us to get the source code open. So we have to check the legal implications of that and etc. But everything must be open source at Red Hat. That's a guarantee that I can give you, and it will stay that way forever. That's why I'm wearing the hat. Now, this can only work if we respect all of these people, which is why we have a business model called the subscription model. And that is a wonderful thing, because with the subscription model, you get access to all these features and updates and upgrades and etc. without having to pay again. There is no upgrade fee. When you have a subscription, you get access to the new version the moment we publish it. And the moment we publish it, you can start using it, period. As long as your subscription runs, you decide which version to use. And this model, the subscription model, when we pioneered that a long time ago, it's more than 12 years now, when we pioneered that at that time, many people said, we're totally crazy, it will never work. We had to sell boxes, we were selling boxes at that time with Red Hat Linux. But it worked, and now the whole software market is switching to subscription-based services. Even Microsoft, Office 365, Microsoft Office in the cloud, it's a subscription service, SAP and all these other companies. So there seems to be a big advantage to this. And again, we pioneered this. We pioneered open source as a business model, we pioneered subscriptions, and what you heard today about cloud solutions, trust me, it will be the standard solution in a few years from now. Companies like VMware and other big companies, they're trying to build a closed market. They want to become the Microsoft of cloud computing. But the customer, the user, has already learned that this is not the right method, and so they're interested in open solutions, and that's why we're here. I'm quite sure you are here too. Now, I won't talk too much about licensing and how that works. This is a legal explanation that takes between 3 and 5 hours. I will, however, mention in short that we have a big problem called software patents. You heard about this. Software patents are the most evil thing on this planet. I think they're even worse than Facebook. And software patents are killing innovation everywhere. And Red Hat as a company has always opposed this innovation stifling effect of patents. We are not fundamentally against the patent system. We just say for software it doesn't make any sense. So we are fighting this, and we hope you can join that fight. Invite me for a beer and I can tell you some wonderful stories about how to do that. Now, in closing, because my time's running out, this is the current situation in the market. I took SAP and Microsoft here, but you can also put in Amazon and Azure or whatever you want. Interoperability, it's at the heart of the problems at any company and organization. Do we want a cloud market that looks like this, with a lot of islands that are not connected? And when they are connected, they are in a way that these guys make whatever secret deals with each other, and you as a user of these services, no matter if it's software or cloud or whatever, it's always the same picture. If you use this stuff, you're dependent on these people to do the right thing, because it leads over time to a spider web of contracts and deals and etc. And you as a user, as a customer, cannot update a part of it. This is a typical situation at many customers, by the way. They cannot update Windows because there are some dependencies on old legacy systems, and updating that could kill everything. So they rather not update, which is fundamentally wrong. And there's a solution for that. And that puts everything together. It's quite simple. You have to change the picture a little bit. You introduce open standards. Especially people from the government, should they be here. Listen very carefully. As soon as you introduce open standards, this whole interoperability problem effectively goes away. Because now, when I implement something with an open standard, I do not even have to ask Microsoft or VMware for permission or compatibility, because it's guaranteed by being standards compliant. I'm interoperable by definition with the rest of the market. And this is the cool thing. Using open standards, you create a truly open market, very capitalist market where the best solution wins, and the best solution over time will definitely always be an open source solution. That's what I'm convinced of, and that's the reason I work for Red Hat. And with that, I hope you will listen to the next presentation, which explains to you in detail how this works in practice for a system called OpenShift, which is a wonderful way of doing cloud or private property-based solutions using all of this open technology. And when I'm again back here next year, we will talk again about openness, and we will see how much more openness we have in Russia. It should be fun. And thanks for listening.